As a kid, there was no other genre that piqued my attention like fantasy did. From the time I was 5 years old and was read The Hobbit for the first time, I knew there were no other story types that I would like better. Fantasy to me had the most creativity, the most imagination, the most intrigue because you could do things with it and create spaces that just didn't apply to the modern world. You could create entire worlds, political frameworks, magic and class systems, theologies, languages, geographies, pretty much anything you set your mind to do within a world of your choosing. And if you were really good, other people would read your work just as voraciously as you loved writing it, and your work might just catch on. Stories like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, The Chronicles of Narnia, Aragon, and Percy Jackson and the Olympians dominated my formative years. I was consistently in awe of the creativity, the worlds that each author had created, the creatures in each world, and of course, all of the characters. I wanted to live in the worlds and go on all the adventures that my favorite characters did and be a part of their epic stories. And that desire and love for the fantasy genre never really went away the older that I got. And of course, seeing many of those projects in live action helped, though none more so than Lord of the Rings. To this day, this trilogy of movies still holds me in a thrall that no other collection of films ever has or likely ever will. They are escapism and pure cinema at its finest. It has been nearly 25 years since The Fellowship of the Ring, and I still get the same chills that I did watching Amon Hen now as I did when I was a kid. The heroism, the characters, the profound storyline, masterful writing and dialogue, and brilliant performances still make them the greatest movies of all time in my personal opinion, and not just in the fantasy genre. And in the near quarter century since these movies have been released, fantasy has seen nothing like them. There have been good moments, in Game of Thrones certainly, but something as epic as Lord of the Rings might never be seen again. And even though I'm hopeful that at some point, some creative and artistic person will come along that has a genuine love for these stories and a drive to create them accurately, I have a feeling that those types of interpretations will not be coming from within Hollywood. Case in point, there have been a few big-budget networks that have attempted to crack the fantasy genre through a series of shows that have just been complete disasters. I am, of course, referring to The Witcher, Rings of Power, and Wheel of Time. All three of these shows are based on brilliant stories told by talented men who had real-life experiences behind their creativity and who poured their heart and souls into telling these stories. In many cases, they were trying to create their own mythologies and tell stories based on and for their homelands. And these works of art, instead of being treated with the care, respect, and, to be honest, the reverence that they deserve, have been utterly chewed up and spit out by big companies too interested in pushing content and creating a message than telling the stories that made people fall in love with these books in live action. There are many examples as to why the fantasy genre is wholly awful these days, but for the sake of time, we're going to be discussing these three shows only because their crimes against cinema and writing are the most obvious. One of the reasons that the fantasy genre is beloved by so many, and me in particular, is the escapism aspect. Being able to go into a world completely different from the one you know is exciting and different. It introduces you to a new way of thinking and opens you to a world of possibilities. There is no sense of escapism in these shows. The first crime that these shows commit against the source material and the viewers is that there is no distinction between them all. Photos of Rings of Power could be mistaken for set photos from The Witcher and vice versa. All of them use elves in the same capacity, and every character looks no different from any other character. Each world is dingy, dusty, tired-looking, and washed out. The color palettes are dim and low quality. The style of clothing is redundant and habitual. The armor looks like something out of Spirit of Halloween, and everyone speaks in the same slow, plodding, methodical tone, as if they are trying to give an air of stoicism or seriousness, and it just comes across as laughably pretentious. One of the most subtle and possibly underappreciated things about the Lord of the Rings movies is how distinct certain aspects of Middle-earth look. Rohan is very different from Gondor in terms of armor, dress, and architecture. Isengard orcs are different looking from Mordor orcs. The Shire is different from Bree, and so on. And each location is rich with their own peoples, customs, cultures, and traditions, and it makes the world feel rich and alive. This village in Wheel of Time looks no different to this little village in Rings of Power. Both are run by females and contain tired-looking old men and dirty-looking youths. Both, while being set in some sort of medieval fantasy landscape, are somehow as diverse as downtown LA. This is not how you create escapism, and while a great deal of this is just incompetence, the longer it goes on, the harder it is to believe that writers aren't aware of how this works. I'm sure there are some that just exist in their own ignorance, but it would not surprise me if there is a contingent of writers and producers and other execs that believe any type of distinction in a fantasy world between cultures creates disunity. That believe that women can do the exact same things as men in this world with the exact same results, and that any job or role is interchangeable between the sexes. Any woman can be a warrior and defend the village, and in fact, it is preferred if she does so. You would never be able to tell, looking at these scenes, which one is from Rings of Power and which one is from Wheel of Time. Each character is ethnically diverse, despite being from what we're supposed to believe is a medieval world. Every woman is somehow in charge of the village and rallies the tired old men who just want to be left alone to fight. And every monster looks similar as well. They walk the same, have the same aesthetics, even sound the same, because fantasy writers of today cannot create anything original. Monsters in fantasy world are some of the coolest elements about fantasy, and the trilogies, like The Lord of the Rings, did an exceptional job creating terrifying monsters that look wildly different from each other. And like the differences in cultures, clothing, and aesthetics, the differences do a wonderful job at deepening the world and creating escapism. But if the monsters look the same, and the characters look the same, and the cultures have no distinction, and everyone has the same chip on their shoulder for imagined slights that aren't well explained, then what is the use and where is the enjoyment in these shows? And speaking of a lack of enjoyment, one of the things that I have always enjoyed about fantasy books, beyond the escapism and rich world building, is the nuanced dialogue that is subtle and profound, thought-provoking and insightful. A lot of the men and women who wrote these stories had real-life experiences that informed their stories, like war. The dialogue and how certain characters talk to each other about things like duty and sacrifice and war and death reflect that. Not only does it make the dialogue feel incredibly real and grounding, it's also long-lasting and profound because these concepts are pretty universal. The dialogue in these stories wasn't convoluted. It was simple and straightforward, making it even more authentic and hard-hitting. Now we have dialogue like this.
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Because the stone sees only downward.
A single Aes Sedai can handle you like bait fish. We would have been so much better off if you were a girl.
Each line of dialogue in these shows is filled with metaphors that are convoluted, nonsensical, and pseudo-intellectual. It's an ignorant person writing something that they think a smart person would say, and failing miserably. There is nothing to be said about death or the reality of war or hope and courage. Instead, all of these shows' dialogue comes across as unbelievably pretentious. Although, the dialogue isn't the only thing that is nonsensical about these shows. A lot of it is tied up in the writers and showrunners crafting a story that looks nothing like the original source material. Most of these stories are written by authors who had authentic and extremely difficult life experiences. Both J.R.R. Tolkien and Robert Jordan served as soldiers in World War I and the Vietnam War. Both men were forever changed by their experiences, and much of their writing is influenced by their lives during the war. It's why so much of their writing contains quotes that speak of bravery, valor, and the duty of men. You will not find themes like those in fantasy shows of today. I've often heard the phrase that people will write what they know, but in this case, we are dealing with showrunners that have no life experience, oftentimes little to no writing experience in the case of J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay. Or you will have directors and writers from the Wheel of Time series and The Witcher who actively despise and mock the source material and have succeeded in writing the shows in their image. The Witcher is notorious for this, with showrunners actively mocking the books and ensuring the departure of Witcher enthusiast Henry Cavill, who was the only Geralt that fans would accept. This is further evidenced by the departure of Geralt from his own show, and the writers choosing to focus a huge spotlight on Ciri, Yennefer, and the group called The Rats, of all things, giving the latter their own spin-off show and movie. Just looking at this photo, I can't imagine why anyone would think to take fantasy shows seriously anymore. They have become a parody of actual acting, a bad caricature of community theater, and a director's bizarre fever dream. Rafe Judkins proved to be no better when he stated that if people didn't like his show, he would just make their favorite characters gay in tweets like this. This is the level of incompetence and spite that we are dealing with when it comes to the state of modern fantasy. No one understands the stories. No one understands the themes and values. No one understands the characters, and what's worse is that no one wants to. Instead, they are far too focused on using these characters and stories and changing the themes to suit themselves, because most of these shows are some sort of vanity project or else a vehicle for whatever social justice message is currently popular. And thankfully, in the case of shows like Wheel of Time, the fans made their voices heard enough that this fantastical representation of what not to do in writing was canceled this year. With The Witcher, the show was on its last legs with a severe ratings drop and the departure of its titular character for a less authentic version. As for The Rings of Power, it's only a matter of time before the showrunners of that offense against literature concede, and the show folds too. So the good news is that fans currently are winning in the war against modern fantasy, at least. The bad news is that there is still a large gap in the market for a good fantasy show, though House of the Dragon is doing its best to be authentic. However, there is still room for a robust set of fantasy shows with a love for their own source material and an unwillingness to bow to modern day. Whether we'll get all that in the near future in a package anywhere near as good as Lord of the Rings is anyone's guess. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. What do you think of the state of modern fantasy and the shows that I mentioned in this video? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comment section, and let the conversations begin. Until next time, everyone.